Today's Washing Tech episode is brought to you by Audible. Get a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial at washingtech.com/book. Over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. And also Warby Parker. Get a free 5-day home try-on at warbyparkertrial.com/Joe. 5 pairs, 5 days, and the try-on is 100% free. That's warbyparkertrial.com/Joe.
There's a relationship between the erosion of public goods and social goods, or our kind of struggle to have those things exist, and where these technologies fill in the gap.
Welcome to the Washing Tech Policy Podcast. We deliver the latest tech policy news and brightest tech policy experts to you, wherever you are, so you can stay productive, relevant, and informed in less time. From Washington, D.C., it's the Washing Tech Policy Podcast with Joe Miller.
The FTC is reportedly investigating YouTube for alleged child privacy violations. GOP lawmakers split over election security, and Safiya Noble is my guest. Hey everybody, the Federal Trade Commission is reportedly investigating YouTube over children's privacy concerns. According to the Washington Post, the Alphabet subsidiary faces steep fines if it's found to have violated the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act, COPPA, which prohibits tracking and targeting children under 13. The FTC and YouTube both declined to comment. The Hill reports the GOP lawmakers are divided over election security, with some, including Mitch McConnell, who think additional legislation is unnecessary to deal with the challenges posed by bad actors using technology to interfere with the electoral process. Other Republicans, like Lindsey Graham, think there's more we can do. We reported last week that Facebook announced plans to launch its own cryptocurrency called Libra. But House Financial Services Committee Chair Maxine Waters is pushing back. Waters asked Facebook to place a moratorium on the release of its cryptocurrency until after Congress has had a chance to review it. Virginia Senator Mark Warner agreed. Both lawmakers said the company's troubled past is a warning sign. Waters is scheduled a hearing for July 17th. The Department of Homeland Security stated in a request for information it released last week that it would be moving the data of hundreds of millions of people around the globe to Amazon Web Services. The DHS is moving the data to a Homeland Advanced Recognition Technology, HART system, hosted by AWS, which will upgrade the agency's ability to link biometric and biographical data to DNA. The system is designed to quickly identify anyone who's in the database, such as suspected criminals, immigration violators, terrorists, and frankly, you, if you're in the database. The Guardian reports that Google parent Alphabet's board of directors voted down 13 shareholder proposals that would have ended forced arbitration for sexual harassment claims by contract workers, addressed ethical concerns stemming from AI in China, and several other social concerns. The board voted against the proposals despite a protest happening outside the company's headquarters during the vote. Apple CEO Tim Cook called out big tech at a Stanford University commencement speech last week. He said tech companies need to accept responsibility for the chaos they create, and that, quote, lately, it seems this industry is becoming better known for a less noble innovation. The belief you can claim credit without accepting responsibility. We see it every day now with every data breach, every privacy violation, every blind eye turned to hate speech, fake news poisoning our national conversation, the false miracles in exchange for a single drop of your blood, end quote. That was Apple CEO Tim Cook at that Stanford speech. In a letter penned by Missouri Representative Emanuel Cleaver, members of the House of Representatives are calling on tech companies to diversify the ranks of the outside counsel the companies use. Currently, tech companies retain large law firms notorious for their dismal diversity records and segregating lawyers of color into contractor roles. Congressman Cleaver, along with Representatives Robin Kelly, G.K. Butterfield, and Barbara Lee, sent the letter to Apple, Amazon, Alphabet, Microsoft, IBM, Dell, Intel, HP, Cisco, and Facebook. Finally, Fairfax County, Virginia, and Dominion Energy landed a $250,000 grant from the Virginia Department of Rail and Public Transportation for an autonomous electric shuttle to Merrifield. The pilot will be part of a larger potential effort to build a large-scale autonomous transportation system in Virginia. The first pilot will connect the Dunloring Metro Rail Station with the Mosaic District. Under the deal, Dominion will purchase or lease the vehicle, and Fairfax County will handle operations. Events. Today, Tuesday, June 25th, the Senate Commerce Committee Subcommittee on Communications, Technology, Innovation, and the Internet is having a hearing entitled Optimizing for Engagement, Understanding the Use of Persuasive Technology on Internet Platforms. That's at 10 a.m. in Hart 216. Then we have 4 events happening at 2 p.m. In Rayburn and Cannon. The first one is in Rayburn 228, and that's the House Committee on Financial Services Task Force on Financial Technology overseeing the fintech revolution, domestic and international perspectives on fintech regulation. In Cannon 310, we've got the House Committee on Homeland Security, Subcommittee on Cybersecurity, Infrastructure, Protection, and Innovation having a hearing on cybersecurity challenges for state and local governments, assessing how the federal government can help. That's in Cannon 310. Also at 2 p.m., House Committee on the Judiciary, Subcommittee on Constitution, Civil Rights, and Civil Liberties doing a hearing on continuing challenges to the Voting Rights Act since Shelby County versus Holder. That's at 2 p.m. in Rayburn 2141. Also at 2 p.m., House Committee on Science, Space, and Technology, Subcommittee on Investigations and Oversight, having an election security voting technology vulnerabilities hearing. Again, that's in Rayburn 2318. Then in the evening, this evening, Tuesday, Transformative Technology of DC is having a How the Future of Work and STEM Are Impacting Social Well-Being event. That's from 6:30 p.m. to 8:30 p.m. in district offices located at 10 G Street Northeast. Turning to tomorrow, Wednesday, June 26th, the House Committee on Homeland Security is having a hearing on examining social media companies' efforts to counter online terror content and misinformation. That's at 10 a.m. in Cannon 310. We also have the House Committee on Science, Space, and Technology having a hearing on artificial intelligence at 10 a.m. in Rayburn 2318. And then at 2 p.m., we've got a House Committee on Science, Space, and Technology, Subcommittee on Space and Aeronautics, NASA's aeronautics mission, enabling the transformation of aviation. That's at 2 p.m. Then we have tomorrow night, Wine Wednesday from 5 p.m. to 8 p.m. at Founding Farmers Reston, located at 1904 Reston Metro Plaza. Turning to Thursday, June 27th, the Federal Trade Commission is having their Privacy Con from 8:15 to 5 p.m. at the FTC's Constitution Center, located at 400 7th Street Southwest. The Ford Motor Company Fund is hosting her Impact Entrepreneurship Summit at Georgetown University's McDonough School of Business from 9:30 to 4 p.m. That's at 3700 O Street Northwest. And then on Friday, June 28th, the FCC is having a workshop on promoting multilingual alerting, 9 a.m. to 2:30 p.m. at the FCC. So there's a lot going on. The music didn't even last long enough. In any case, you can find links to all of the stories and the events in the show notes and also in our Twitter feed. And our handle is at WashingTech. Stay with us. Audible is offering a free audiobook download to WashingTech listeners. Choose from hundreds of thousands of titles, including the book written by our guest today, Safiya Noble, entitled Algorithms of Oppression, How Search Engines Reinforce Racism. You can download Algorithms of Oppression free by trying audible.com. Sign up for your free audiobook and 30-day trial today at washingtech.com/book.
Tech policy is global policy. This is the WashingTech Tech Policy Podcast, serving the world.
My guest today is Dr. Safiya Noble, Associate Professor at UCLA in the Departments of Information Studies and African American Studies, and a visiting faculty member to the University of Southern California's Annenberg School of Communication. Previously, she was an assistant professor in the Department of Media and Cinema Studies and the Institute for Communications Research at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. Her academic research focuses on the design of digital media platforms on the internet and their impact on society. Please welcome Safiya Noble. Safiya, thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Joe. It's good to be here.
So tell us about your background before you became a scholar and author.
Well, I started out my career in corporate social responsibility consulting at a kind of small firm in San Francisco. And that led me to about a 15-year career in marketing and advertising. This was the late 90s when cause-related marketing and kind of social good and big business were closely aligned. And that was kind of a really big effort that was underway in corporate America. And so I spent my whole first career working in that realm. A lot of my work was focused on multicultural consumers, consumers that were often overlooked. And I loved that kind of work, quite frankly. But, it wasn't really sustainable for other kinds of life goals that I had, like having a personal life that wasn't married to a BlackBerry or a smartphone. So, as I was leaving in the industry and I was thinking about just the limits that are imposed upon us when we work in these corporate jobs. And there were other things I was thinking about and other conversations I wanted to be able to have. And I fell in love with a boy, and he was from the Midwest, and we moved to Illinois, and that became the perfect moment to go back to graduate school and kind of reinvent myself into academia, which was really something I had dreamt of for a long time. And that's when I found grad school and started studying the internet and information cultures more broadly. And that led me to today.
So where do you think the disconnect is between what the public thinks about algorithms and what algorithms really are? How does the trust level we expect from algorithms differ, in your view, from the trust these algorithms deserve?
Okay, well, this is a really great question because it's a little bit complex in the sense that, first of all, I think that the public has been kind of sold a bill of goods by big tech industries that digital technologies will solve all of our problems, right? Make everything easier and more efficient. And that's been a strong message for a couple of decades. Of course, many of us have either come of age or have incorporated the internet into so much of our everyday lives, especially in the United States and in Europe. And so things are, significantly different than they were. I mean, finding information, for example, or, getting directions somewhere, those things now young people can't imagine the old days when we broke out a cookbook or a Thomas guide, right, to help us do our lives. So I think that in many ways, there has been some kind of ease brought to our lives with digital technologies. And so that's been kind of a blanket set of ideas that have been applied to all algorithms, right, and all digital technologies, that they're all here to improve our quality of life. And there's a high degree of trust that I think we need to start to interrogate. Certainly, the algorithms that are opaque and hidden from view, algorithms that are used in things like determining whether you get a mortgage, whether you get into school, whether you get out of jail, whether you go to jail. There are other kinds of algorithms, and I think, artificial intelligence that are increasingly deciding for us that preclude our own stories, our own opportunities, the chances that we used to take on each other as human beings. We're starting to see more and more slipping away of that kind of investment in each other.
So we've been seeing sort of this wearing away of the social contract for a few decades now, and this is just sort of accelerating it.
Yeah. And, one of the things that I think people sometimes don't make the connections around are things like the over-reliance, let's say, of the public on something like a search engine or social media to diagnose their health. Right. Now, this is a fundamental way that a lot of people use the internet, is to figure out what's wrong with their health. And of course, they're fed many times propaganda or disinformation. We see this with kind of the rise of the anti-vaxxers online and the spreading of disinformation. But, we need to think about that in relationship to things like the erosion of healthcare services and the limits that people are beginning to experience about access to high quality healthcare. So see, there's a relationship between the erosion of public goods and social goods, or our kind of struggle to have those things exist, and where these technologies fill in the gap. And we see this in health. We see this in education as public schools and public education and higher education become increasingly inaccessible and the quality declines in those spaces. People have to fill in the gaps with digital media platforms on the internet that may or may not be in our best interest.
So the frame that you start with, the context you give us in the beginning of your book, is sort of what happens when we search for Black girls, Asian girls, and Latin girls online. Tell us a bit about what you saw. And when we talk about 2019, what are you seeing today? How have things improved when it comes to how people of color are represented online? Or maybe it's gotten worse from your perspective?
Well, it's interesting. As I was leaving the advertising industry and going back to graduate school, the thing that prompted me to explore the ways that girls of color, women of color, and kind of people and communities were represented in search engines was because as I was leaving the industry, we were starting to spend an incredible amount of our media buying dollars for our clients on search. Paid search and search engine optimization to make sure that our clients were visible on the first page of search results. And as I was leaving that industry, that was happening. And in academia, people were involved in things like these large scale like Google book digitization projects. And people were talking about Google and search engines like they were the new public library online. And, that information wants to be free. And this was, of course, an incredible disconnect for me at that moment when I entered grad school around 2009 or so, because I knew that these search engine platforms were actually advertising platforms. They were not libraries. They were not education portals in terms of their intent and how they made money. And so that prompted me to think about, well, how could I communicate what really is happening online when we're moving from kind of a pre-search engine era of subject matter experts who are curating, complex trees of information that you would have to kind of sort through and spend a lot of time into this new 2.0, Web 2.0 environment where a search engine was just kind of doing the information brokering for you and sorting and finding for you. And what I found was that when you started to look at people, children, people of color, children of color who are incredibly vulnerable, who are in the numerical minority in our population, who don't have the capital, the resources, the money and power to compete with big industries and companies, that they fared terribly. So this is where you find back in 2009, all the way up until the fall of 2012, when you did a keyword search on the words Black girls, the first page was almost exclusively, it was 80% pornography. And the question is, how would Black girl children ever compete with the porn industry, right? A well-capitalized, well-resourced, well-connected kind of industry to recuperate their own identities. You didn't have to add the word sex or the word porn. Black girls were just synonymous with pornography. And of course, this has persisted for Latina girls and for Asian girls. And so I've been tracking this and, more broadly beyond kind of vulnerable communities, but more broadly ideas and concepts. And in the book, I just document so many of these kinds of failures where people cannot control the ways in which they're represented in these search engines, and then try to also help us understand what alternatives could emerge. I mean, what would it mean if we had public interest technologies, public interest search engines, more search engines, and we could understand them not just as advertising platforms, but maybe some other type of information resource where this kind of manipulation and I think misrepresentation doesn't happen so prevalently.
What are the broader societal implications here?
people now turn to these platforms as kind of the fundamental sites of information to make important decisions about their lives. And of course, we see that in the realm of things like social media, Facebook, Twitter, and other social media platforms, that the flood of propaganda or disinformation, similar to the kinds of disinformation and misinformation that flourished in search platforms, that has real world implications on things like democracy, on calls for ethnic cleansing and genocide, on the rise of white supremacy and white nationalism in the United States and Europe, in the ways in which people fact check and use these platforms and are often met with, again, propaganda, lack of facts. I mean, even right after the 2016 presidential election, when you did a search on final election results, Google search led you to the first hit being a disinformation site that reported out that Donald Trump had won the popular vote. Now, we know that he in fact won the Electoral College and that Hillary Clinton won the popular vote. But when you ask people about why the country is so divided, why we don't have shared values and shared understandings, it's because many of these technologies were so reliant upon spread disinformation and make it very difficult to ascertain the truth. And I think that the broader social implications of this, when we start thinking about things like climate change, when we start thinking about how we vote, these platforms play too much of a central role, and we're going to have to contend with some of that.
So where do we go from here, Safiya? These platforms have become so central to our lives. I was thinking about this recently with efforts in the House to pass legislation requiring voting districts to use paper ballots exclusively. Tech policy touches everything we do in every way you can imagine. What alternatives would you recommend, and how would we implement those?
We absolutely have to start electing people who have much higher levels of digital literacy and really understand the implications of these platforms. We see municipalities, state governments, federal governments engaging in software programs that they don't understand how they work. They're completely opaque. There's no auditing or accountability or transparency. Absolutely, from voting software platforms all the way through predicting whether someone should go back to jail or not. So we need to have a much greater public policy and consumer protection from these decision-making systems. And I think that has got to be in the top 5 agenda items in DC for sure.
Well, Safiya, thanks for joining me. It's been wonderful having you on and shedding light on these critical issues, especially as we head into the 2020 election. Now let's turn to your icebreaker, your career hack, and your pick for our book this week. Okay, so it's time for this week's icebreaker. What's one thing that most people don't know about you?
This is really hard because I feel like with the internet, it's easy to find out a lot of things about people. All right. So one thing people don't know is that for my foreign language in high school and college, I took American Sign Language. And for many years, I did kind of ad hoc sign language interpreting for deaf communities. And I used to be a really amazing signer. Not so much anymore.
That's fantastic. My thing is so much less serious. I'm almost tempted to move on and not answer it for myself.
Tell me.
Well, I like peanut butter and pickle sandwiches.
I think you should keep that a secret. That sounds horrible.
You should try it. Try it. It's good.
Not trying it.
You definitely try it.
Okay.
Or your kids can try it.
I might push that off on the kids and just look for the faces.
Just see. You'll see.
Okay.
You'll see.
Okay.
All right. So you've made a very successful career change from corporate to academia that you were describing earlier. Career changes aren't easy to pull off. Was imposter syndrome ever an issue for you?
Oh, yeah, of course. I mean, anytime you go from one career to another, listen, I was writing in PowerPoint. That was my main language when I was in corporate America. And then I had to go to academia and try to pull off a 25-page paper. And I remember the first year of that and it was every kind of nightmare. I just wasn't good at it. I was terrible. And so, of course, you feel like an imposter when you're doing things that you're not strong in. And, it's taken years to become a writer in academia rather than in corporate America. But I will tell you that there's nothing is more of an imposter kind of invoking experience than working in a career or a job you don't love, that doesn't resonate for you, that you don't, care about. And I would just say for anybody, and I do say this to my friends who are considering going back to grad school. I mean, I went back in my late 30s, early 40s. And, just do it. I mean, there's no reason not to make the changes that you want to make, because now, instead of getting up every day and thinking about, other people's projects and products and services, I get to think about my own. And that's an incredibly privileged opportunity and position. But I think it's one that allows me to kind of sing my own song and write my own story. And isn't that what we all want for ourselves?
That's right. And I think to all of us, many of us to some extent are affected by imposter syndrome. I know that I've been affected by it. I know others have been affected by it. And the thing that I always try to remember is that, no one is going to communicate and express the issues that you're working on in the exact same way. If you start a business, the first thing people will tell you is that it's already been done. Well, no one's going to do it in your unique way. So in that sense, you'll never, ever be an imposter. So tell us the book you're reading these days, Safiya.
Okay, so I am rereading a new book that just came out. I read it when it was in draft form, but now it's out and I'm holding it in my hands. It's called Behind the Screen, and it's a new book by Sarah Roberts, who is one of my colleagues at UCLA, and it's about the shadowy world of content moderators. And these are the people who screen all the horrific things out of the internet. And out of the platforms that we're used to engaging with, and what their work is like, what their lives are like. And it's, it's a daunting book that I think everyone who uses social media should absolutely read.
I think it's interesting because there are a lot of different fields. I read the Verge article. I haven't read the book yet, but I'm seeing contractors in a variety of different areas and where algorithms are affecting and reifying the social and racial and ethnic and gender stratifications that we've seen before the internet. That requires, I think, more investigation. You hear this idea of white collar sweatshops, for example, of lawyers working at major firms, many of which are people of color, but they pay them a fraction of what they would pay for a first year associate for years and years and years, and then mark them up to the client 4 or 5 times what they're paid.
Yeah, I mean, I think when you look at internet workers, it's quite similar. Most people think of high-tech workers as white-collar software engineers in Silicon Valley. But when you read books like this, you start to see that, no, it's actually former colonial sites where around the world where the U.S. has had the colonial kind of extractive interests, where people of color are doing the dirty work, quite frankly, the horrible, hard, psychologically debilitating work. And, that's not unlike other industries. So I think it's really important we understand the total kind of ecosystem that we're engaging with. And, there's a lot of degradation happening in the world, and I think we have to make those things visible. We don't have to organize our societies and our economies this way. So we've got to keep studying and looking and reading and educating ourselves.
Well, thanks again, Safiya, for joining me.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Do you have any final ideas you'd like to leave with us before we close? And where can we find you online?
I think, the thing that I would say to people who listen to your show is that, the policy making and influencing is so important. Every major kind of civil rights gain that we've ever seen in this country has really come through these legal and policy channels. So even though it's difficult to make policy and influence policy, we need to care deeply about what these platforms are doing in terms of, radically altering the way human beings live. I think that artificial intelligence in particular is going to become a human rights issue in the 21st century. And we need to keep our eyes open and keep building policy and be aggressive about it. I would say if you want to find more about my work, I'm always trying to tweet out studies and my colleagues' work. If you're interested in any of these topics, you can follow me on Twitter at Safiya Noble.
And you've been listening to Safiya Noble, associate professor at UCLA, visiting professor at USC Annenberg, and author of Algorithms of Oppression, How Search Engines Reinforce Racism. Safiya, thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
That concludes episode 191 of the podcast. There's a lot to digest here when it comes to algorithms and the effect they're having on society, particularly underrepresented and under-resourced communities. Things are moving so fast and it's tough to keep up, but thanks to the great work of Safiya Noble and others, we are keeping up. Question is, can algorithms keep up with us? Thanks for listening. If you like what we do here, we'd love to hear from you. Please take a moment, head over to Apple Podcasts, give it a review. It helps others know what they can expect from the show and really helps us out. Thanks again to all of you for listening, and I'll see you back here next week. Take care.
Washington Tech.